The first gunshot nearly took her head off. Harriet Nichols ducked just in time, the bullet splintering the wooden post beside her as the stagecoach lurched violently to one side. The year was 1876, and what had begun as a routine journey to Wyoming territory was quickly turning into a fight for survival. "Get down, miss," the driver shouted before another shot rang out, silencing him forever as he toppled from his perch. Harriet pressed herself to the floor of the coach, her heart hammering against her ribs like a blacksmith's anvil. 24 years old and alone in the world, she had left Philadelphia with hopes of a teaching position in Centralia, Wyoming. Now, she wondered if she would live to see another sunrise. The coach careened wildly before coming to an abrupt halt, throwing her against the opposite seat. Through the small window, she glimpsed 3 masked riders circling the stagecoach. "Check for valuables," a gruff voice commanded. "And see if anyone's still breathing." Harriet's hand closed around the small derringer her father had insisted she carry. 2 bullets, not much, but perhaps enough to save her life. The door wrenched open, and she aimed the tiny pistol at the silhouette that filled the frame. Before she could squeeze the trigger, a thunderous volley of gunfire erupted from somewhere to her left. The outlaw at the door crumpled, and his companions returned fire at this new threat. "Ride out," one shouted, and Harriet heard hoofbeats retreating rapidly into the distance. Silence fell, punctuated only by the nervous snorting of the stagecoach horses. Harriet kept her derringer trained on the doorway, her hand trembling but resolute. "Hello in there," called a deep voice. "Are you hurt? The bandits are gone." "I'm armed," she replied, trying to keep the quaver from her voice. A man stepped slowly into view, hands raised slightly. "Madam, I mean you no harm. Name's Frank Xavier. My ranch is just over that ridge. Heard the commotion and came to help." He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind. A dusty Stetson sat atop dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned skin, and though he appeared formidable with a rifle in one hand, there was a gentleness to his expression that made Harriet lower her derringer slightly. "The driver?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Frank Xavier shook his head. "I'm sorry, madam, he didn't make it. The shotgun rider's gone too." Harriet closed her eyes briefly, fighting back tears. "I'm bound for Centralia," she said. "I'm to be the new school teacher." "Centralia's still 15 miles west," Frank replied, "but my ranch is just 2 miles from here. You're welcome to rest there, and I can take you to town tomorrow." "I don't want to impose. It's no imposition, Miss Nichols. Harriet Nichols. Miss Nichols. Night's coming on, and it's not safe for you to continue alone." He glanced at the bodies of the stage employees. "I'll need to notify the sheriff about what happened here. My ranch is the nearest shelter." Harriet hesitated, weighing her limited options. Her trunks were strapped to the top of the coach, containing everything she owned in the world. She had nowhere else to go, and this stranger had just saved her life. "Very well, Mr. Xavier, I accept your offer." Frank helped her down from the coach and collected her trunks. They retrieved her smaller valise from inside, and he secured her belongings onto his horse. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes, though it's been some time." "You'll ride with me. We'll send someone back for the coach and—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Harriet understood. The ride to Frank Xavier's ranch was mostly silent. Harriet clung to his waist as the horse picked its way across the rugged Wyoming landscape. The dying sunlight painted the prairie gold and crimson, and in other circumstances she might have found it beautiful. As they crested a hill, a sprawling ranch came into view. A substantial 2-story house stood surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, and lights glowed in the windows. "Xavier Ranch," Frank announced. "Not the biggest spread in these parts, but it's mine." As they approached, Harriet noticed several figures moving about the yard. A young boy of about 10 ran out to meet them. "Pa, you're back. Did you find the—" The boy stopped short when he spotted Harriet. "Thomas, this is Miss Nichols," Frank said, dismounting and helping Harriet down. "She was on the stagecoach that was attacked." "Miss Nichols, my son Thomas." Thomas regarded her with curiosity. "Are you staying for supper?" Before Harriet could answer, 2 more boys emerged from the house. One appeared to be about 14, the other perhaps 16 or 17. "Boys," Frank called, "come meet our guest. Miss Nichols, these are my other sons, James and William." The older boys nodded politely, though with evident surprise. "James, help with Miss Nichols's trunks. William, go tell Mrs. Peabody we have a guest for dinner." "Yes, Pa," the boys responded in unison. Frank turned to Harriet. "Mrs. Peabody is our housekeeper, though housekeeper doesn't quite cover it. She manages everything indoors, but she's getting on in years." Harriet followed Frank into a spacious, if somewhat sparse, home. The furnishings were sturdy and practical, with few decorative touches. It was a house clearly managed by a man and boys. Mrs. Peabody turned out to be a thin, gray-haired woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She greeted Harriet with brisk courtesy and showed her to a small but clean bedroom where she could refresh herself. "Dinner in 30 minutes, the housekeeper announced. "Though I don't know what I'll scrape together with another mouth to feed." After Mrs. Peabody left, Harriet sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She had nearly died. Now she was in a stranger's home, miles from her destination, with no clear plan for what came next. Dinner was a simple affair of beef stew and biscuits. The Xavier boys watched her with undisguised curiosity as she ate, while Frank explained to Mrs. Peabody what had happened on the road. "I'll ride into town tomorrow to inform Sheriff Miller," Frank said, "and to take Miss Nichols to Centralia." "Terrible business, Mrs. Peabody muttered, ladling more stew into Thomas's bowl. "These roads aren't safe anymore." "The stew is delicious," Harriet offered, hoping to change the subject. Mrs. Peabody snorted. "It's passable at best. My hands aren't what they used to be." "Cooking for 4 hungry men is no easy task at my age." "I could help," Harriet suggested impulsively. "While I'm here, I mean, I'm quite handy in the kitchen." "I couldn't ask our guest to cook," Frank protested. "Nonsense," Harriet replied. "It's the least I can do after you saved my life." "I can cook for your boys," she said, smiling at the 3 young faces watching her with interest. The cowboy smiled back, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Then stay forever if you'd like." The table fell silent. Frank's face flushed slightly as he realized what he'd said. "I mean that is you're welcome as long as you need, Miss Nichols." Thomas giggled, and James elbowed him sharply. Harriet felt her own cheeks grow warm. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Xavier. I'll try not to impose for too long." Later that night, as Harriet prepared for bed in the small guest room, she heard a soft knock at her door. "Miss Nichols." It was Frank's voice. "May I have a word?" She opened the door slightly, already dressed in her nightgown with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "I wanted to apologize for my forward comment at dinner," Frank said, his hat in his hands. "It was poorly phrased. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "No need to apologize, Mr. Xavier. You and your family have been most kind." Frank nodded. "I've been thinking. The stage to Centralia only runs once a week. The next one won't come through for 6 days." "Oh." Harriet hadn't considered this complication. "You're welcome to stay here until then, or I can take you into town tomorrow as planned, though accommodations in Centralia are limited." "What do you mean by limited?" "There's one hotel. It's above the saloon." Frank looked uncomfortable. Not exactly suitable for a lady like yourself, especially one who's to be the town's teacher. Harriet bit her lip, considering her options. Perhaps I could stay here for the week. I'd be happy to help Mrs. Peabody with the cooking and household duties. Relief crossed Frank's face. That would be fine, more than fine. Thank you, Mr. Xavier. Good night. Good night, Miss Nichols. As she closed the door, Harriet heard him murmur, "And welcome to Wyoming territory." Morning came with the crowing of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. Harriet dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Mrs. Peabody already at work. "Good morning," Harriet said. "May I help?" The older woman gave her an appraising look. "Can you make biscuits?" "Yes, and quite good ones." "We'll see about that. Flour's in the bin there." Harriet set to work, and by the time the Xavier men came in for breakfast, she had produced a batch of golden brown biscuits that earned approving looks from all. "These are better than Mrs. Peabody's," Thomas declared, earning himself a sharp look from the housekeeper. "Different, not better," Frank corrected diplomatically. "Miss Nichols has kindly agreed to stay with us until the next stage comes through." "Will you be teaching us while you're here?" William asked. "Pa says education's important, but school's too far for us to go regular." "I could certainly give you some lessons," Harriet offered, pleased by the boy's interest. "That's very generous," Frank said. "The boys could use some schooling beyond what I can provide." After breakfast, Frank rode into Centralia to speak with the sheriff and inform the town council that their new teacher had arrived safely, if not quite reached her destination. Mrs. Peabody showed Harriet around the house, explaining the daily routine. "Mr. Xavier lost his wife to fever 6 years ago," the housekeeper said as they folded laundry. "I came to help with the boys, but I'm getting too old for all this now." "They seem like good boys," Harriet observed. "Good enough, though they need a woman's influence." "Mr. Xavier does his best, but a ranch this size takes most of his attention." By mid-afternoon, Harriet had organized an impromptu classroom at the dining table. James and William worked on arithmetic and grammar, while Thomas practiced his letters. She was surprised by their eagerness to learn. Though their education had clearly been sporadic, Frank returned as the sun was beginning to set. From the window, Harriet watched him dismount wearily and hand his horse to one of the ranch hands. Something about his tall figure against the backdrop of mountains and open sky stirred something inside her, something unexpected. "The town council sends their regards," Frank announced as he entered. "They're relieved you're safe and understand the delay. School wasn't set to start for another 2 weeks anyway." "That's a relief," Harriet said. "I've been working with your boys today. They're quite bright." Pride softened Frank's weather-beaten features. Their mother would be pleased to hear that. Catherine always wanted them to get proper schooling. At the mention of his late wife, a shadow crossed his face. Harriet felt a pang of sympathy. She knew loss. Her own parents had died within months of each other 2 years prior, leaving her alone in the world except for a distant cousin in Philadelphia, who made it clear she was an unwelcome burden. "Mr. Xavier," she said impulsively, "would you object if I continued teaching your sons while I'm here? It would help me prepare for my position in town." "I'd be grateful," he replied. "And please call me Frank. Then you must call me Harriet." That evening, Harriet helped prepare a chicken stew that even Mrs. Peabody grudgingly admitted was satisfactory. After dinner, Frank showed her his small library, 2 shelves of books ranging from practical manuals on ranching to volumes of poetry and history. "Catherine loved to read," he explained, running his fingers along the spine of a leather-bound Tennyson. "I've tried to keep books in the house for the boys." "It's a wonderful collection for a frontier home," Harriet said sincerely. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same book, and Harriet felt a curious flutter in her chest. Frank stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. "It's getting late," he said. "Good night, Harriet." The days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings were spent helping with household tasks, followed by lessons for the boys in the afternoon. In the evenings, Frank would sometimes read aloud from one of his books while Harriet worked on mending or her own lesson plans for the upcoming school term. On the third day, a spring rainstorm kept everyone indoors. Thomas grew restless by afternoon. "Can we bake cookies?" he asked Harriet. "Ma used to make molasses cookies when it rained." Mrs. Peabody had gone to bed early with a headache, leaving Harriet in charge of the kitchen. "I don't see why not," she replied, charmed by the boys' hopeful expression. Soon all three boys were helping measure flour and molasses. The kitchen grew warm and fragrant, and for the first time in years, Harriet felt a sense of belonging. The boys chattered freely with her now, sharing stories of ranch life and asking endless questions about Philadelphia. Frank found them there, flour dusting the table and laughter filling the room. He stood in the doorway watching, his expression unreadable. "We're making Ma's cookies," Thomas announced proudly. "I see that," Frank said softly. "You've made quite a mess." "We'll clean it up," Harriet promised, suddenly worried she'd overstepped. "I'm not concerned about the mess." Frank's voice was gentle. "It's good to hear laughter in this kitchen again." Later, when the boys had gone to bed, Frank and Harriet sat by the fire with cups of coffee and the last of the cookies. "They're exactly like Catherine's," Frank said, turning a cookie in his fingers. "How did you know?" "Thomas remembered the recipe surprisingly well," Harriet explained. "And I've made molasses cookies before." Frank stared into the fire. "It's been different having you here. Better." "I've enjoyed it too," Harriet admitted. "Your boys are wonderful, Frank." "You've done an admirable job raising them alone." "Not entirely alone. Mrs. Peabody has been a godsend, though she's been talking about retiring to live with her sister in Cheyenne." He sighed. "I don't know what we'll do without her." Harriet thought of the position waiting for her in Centralia, a small room behind the schoolhouse. Meals taken alone, teaching other people's children but returning to an empty home each night. "Frank," she said hesitantly. "I've been thinking." A loud knock at the door interrupted her. Frank rose, hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip. "Who could that be at this hour?" he muttered. He returned moments later with Sheriff Miller, a stocky man with a handlebar mustache and concerned eyes. "Evening, Miss Nichols. Sorry to disturb you folks so late, but I've news you should hear." The sheriff accepted the coffee Harriet offered. "We caught one of the men who attacked your stagecoach." "That's good news," Frank said. "Yes and no. He claims they weren't after the strongbox. Says they were hired to intercept the stage and take the new schoolteacher." Harriet gasped. "Take me." "But why?" "He says some fellow named Blackwood from back east paid them. Claims this Blackwood said you'd stolen something valuable from him." "Blackwood?" Harriet's blood ran cold. "Elias Blackwood," the sheriff nodded. "That's the name." Frank looked at Harriet. "You know this man?" "My cousin's husband," Harriet said, her voice shaking. "After my parents died, I lived with them briefly in Philadelphia. He made unwanted advances. When I rejected him, he became vindictive. I left as soon as I secured this teaching position." Frank's jaw tightened. "And now he sent men to bring you back, or worse," Sheriff Miller added grimly. "The man we caught isn't exactly the gentle type, but how would he know where to find me?" Harriet wondered. "Small towns talk," the sheriff said. "Word of a new schoolteacher coming from Philadelphia probably wasn't hard to track." "What do we do now?" Frank asked. "The man we caught will hang for murder, but his partners are still out there. And if this Blackwood fellow is determined, he might send others." The sheriff stood. "Miss Nichols, I'd advise staying here at the ranch for now. It's safer than town, and Frank's got enough men to keep watch." After the sheriff departed, Harriet found herself trembling. "I'm so sorry to bring this trouble to your home." "None of this is your fault," Frank said firmly, "and you'll be safe here." "I should leave, go somewhere else, somewhere Blackwood won't find me. Running isn't the answer. This is your home now, Centralia, I mean," he added quickly. "The town needs a teacher, and you can't let this man drive you away." Harriet nodded, though fear still clutched at her heart. "Thank you, Frank." He reached out hesitantly, then took her hand in his. "We'll face this together, I promise." That night, Harriet couldn't sleep. She paced her small room, jumping at every creak and rustle of the wind. When a floorboard groaned in the hallway, she grabbed her derringer before realizing it was only Frank, keeping watch. The next morning, Frank gathered his ranch hands to explain the situation. Extra men were posted as lookouts, and no one was to approach the house without identification. "This changes your plans to go to town," Frank told Harriet as they watched Thomas practice his penmanship. "I can't in good conscience let you go to Centralia until we know it's safe." "The school term starts in just over a week," Harriet said. "What will the town council say? I'll ride in and explain. They'll understand." "And if they don't, if they hire someone else," Frank's expression hardened. "Then you'll stay here. We need a teacher too." The idea hung between them, fraught with unspoken implications. That afternoon, James came running from the fields. "Riders coming, 4 of them." Frank grabbed his rifle. "Get inside, all of you. Harriet, take the boys to the root cellar." "I want to help," William protested. "You'll help by protecting Miss Nichols and your brothers," Frank said firmly. "Go now." The root cellar was cool and dark, smelling of earth and preserved vegetables. Harriet held Thomas close while James and William peered anxiously through the tiny window near the ceiling. "I see Pa and the hands," James reported. "They're talking to the riders." Tense minutes passed. Then they heard Frank calling the all clear. When they emerged, they found him standing with Sheriff Miller and 3 other men. "False alarm," Frank explained. "Sheriff brought some deputies to help keep watch." Relief washed over Harriet. "Thank you, Sheriff." "Just doing my job, madam. We'll catch the other 2 outlaws, don't you worry." That evening, after the boys were in bed, Frank found Harriet on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, joining her on the bench. "It's so different from Philadelphia, bigger somehow." "That's what Catherine used to say." She came from Boston, wasn't used to all this space, said it made her feel small and large at the same time. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. Frank was quiet for a moment. "Harriet, there's something I need to say. These past few days, having you here, it's awakened feelings I thought were buried with Catherine." Harriet's heart quickened. "Frank, please, let me finish. I know it's sudden. I know you came here to be Centralia's teacher, not to get entangled with a widowed rancher and his 3 wild boys. But I can't deny what I feel." "And what is that?" she asked softly. "Hope. For the first time in 6 years, I feel hope for something more than just surviving day to day." He took her hand. "I'm not asking for anything now, just consider the possibility of a future here. Not just as a teacher for my boys, but as part of our family." Harriet looked into his earnest blue eyes. A week ago, she had been a solitary woman heading to a new life among strangers. Now, against all odds, she felt the stirrings of something profound. "I've felt it too," she admitted. "This sense of belonging. It frightens me how quickly it's happened." Frank smiled, the moonlight silvering his features. "The heart knows what it wants," my father used to say. "Mine has been alone so long, I'm not sure I trust it." "Then give it time. We have that at least." He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, She met him halfway, and their lips touched in a gentle, questioning kiss that held the promise of more. The next day brought word from town. The stagecoach would arrive in 2 days to take Harriet to Centralia, and the town council was anxious to meet their new teacher. "What will you do?" Frank asked as they walked along the creek that bordered his property. "What should I do?" Harriet countered. "My heart says stay, but my head reminds me I have obligations." "Could you teach here and in town? Split your time?" Harriet considered this. "It's possible. Centralia isn't so large, there might be only 15 or 20 children of school age. Perhaps 3 days in town, 2 here at the ranch." Hope lit Frank's face. "Would you consider it?" "I would. But there's still the matter of Elias Blackwood. What if he sends more men? We'll be vigilant. And I've written to a friend in Philadelphia to inquire about this Blackwood character to see if there's a legal way to stop his harassment." Harriet was touched by his foresight. "Thank you for everything." The following morning, disaster struck. Mrs. Peabody fell while carrying laundry upstairs, breaking her hip. The doctor from Centralia was summoned, and the prognosis was grim for a woman of her age. "She'll need to go to her sister in Cheyenne," Dr. Thompson said. "She can't manage stairs anymore, and she'll need constant care for some time." "Of course," Frank agreed, though Harriet could see the worry in his eyes. Without Mrs. Peabody, the household would fall into disarray just as roundup season approached. That night, after helping Mrs. Peabody pack for her journey, Harriet made a decision. She found Frank in his study, poring over ranch ledgers. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble. "I'll teach in Centralia 3 days a week, but I'd like to stay here at the ranch." Frank looked up, hope and wariness warring in his expression. As the boy's teacher, and to help with the household now that Mrs. Peabody is leaving." She took a deep breath. "And perhaps in time as something more, if that's still what you want." Frank rose and came around the desk. "It's what I want more than anything, but I won't hold you to promises made in the heat of a moment. Take time in town, be sure." "I am sure," Harriet said with growing conviction. "I've never felt more at home than I do here, with you and the boys." This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, only the sweet certainty of 2 hearts finding their match. The next morning brought another surprise. A telegram arrived from the sheriff's contact in Philadelphia. Blackwood arrested, stop embezzlement, and fraud, stop wife filed divorce, stop no further threat to HN, stop he's finished, Frank said, relief evident in his voice. "You're safe now." Harriet felt as if a great weight had lifted. "I can go to town without fear." "And come back to us," Frank added, a question in his tone. "Yes," she promised. "I'll come back." The stagecoach arrived that afternoon. Harriet packed a small valise with enough for a few days in town, leaving most of her belongings at the ranch, a tangible promise of her return. The Xavier boys gathered around her as the coach approached. "You won't forget to come back, will you?" Thomas asked anxiously. "Never," Harriet assured him. "I'll be back before you know it." Frank helped load her valise onto the stage. 3 days, he said, "then I'll come fetch you. I'll be waiting." She reached up to touch his cheek. "Take care of our boys." His face brightened at her words. "Our boys." "I like the sound of that." As the stagecoach pulled away, Harriet looked back at the 4 figures standing in the yard, her unexpected family. For the first time in years, she was not traveling toward an uncertain future, but leaving behind a heart-bound promise. Centralia proved to be smaller than Harriet had imagined, a single street of businesses with scattered homes around it. The school was a 1-room building at the edge of town, with a small attached apartment that was to be her accommodation. The town council, comprising the mayor, the general store owner, and 2 elderly sisters who had founded Centralia's first church, received her warmly. "We're delighted you've arrived safely," Mayor Simmons said. We heard about the attack on the stage. Dreadful business. And you've been staying at Xavier Ranch? Mrs. Holbrook, one of the sisters, asked with poorly concealed curiosity. Yes, Mr. Xavier and his family have been most kind. Frank Xavier is a good man, the store owner, Mr. Peterson, said approvingly. Lost his wife some years back. Raises those boys as best he can. About the school, Harriet said, steering the conversation back to business. How many students should I expect? 17 at present, Mayor Simmons replied. Ages 6 to 16. Some can only come part-time during planting and harvest. I understand, Harriet said, and I have a proposal regarding my own schedule. She explained her arrangement with Frank: 3 days teaching in town, 2 at the ranch. She expected resistance but found only thoughtful consideration. It's unconventional, Mrs. Holbrook admitted, but practical. The Xavier boys deserve education too, and it's too far for them to travel daily. And it would save the town money on your lodgings if you're only here part-time, Mayor Simmons added pragmatically. Then we're agreed, Harriet asked, surprised at their easy acceptance. Agreed, the mayor said. You'll start next Monday. 3 days here, 2 at the ranch. The rest of Harriet's time in Centralia passed in a whirl of preparation. She organized the schoolroom, met parents and children, and purchased supplies. Each night, she returned to her small apartment behind the school and found it increasingly empty compared to the warmth of the Xavier home. True to his word, Frank arrived on the 3rd day. Harriet's heart leaped at the sight of him riding down the main street. He was accompanied by William, who grinned widely when he spotted her. They insisted on coming along, Frank explained as he helped load her things into the wagon. Thomas is with Mrs. Peterson at the store, buying more molasses. He says your cookies need it, Harriet laughed. Does he now? The ride back to the ranch was filled with William's chatter about the new calf born in their absence, and James's progress on building a chicken coop. Harriet listened, asking questions and feeling more and more certain of her decision. As the ranch came into view, Thomas bouncing excitedly on the porch with James beside him, Harriet knew she had found her place in the world. The weeks that followed settled into a pleasant routine. Harriet taught in town Monday through Wednesday, returning to the ranch for the remainder of the week. She took over the household management, taught the boys, and gradually made the house a home again. Frank courted her properly, with evening walks and Sunday drives. Sometimes they would simply sit on the porch after the boys were asleep, talking until the stars faded. Harriet learned about his childhood in Missouri, his journey west as a young man, his dreams for the ranch. In turn, she shared stories of her parents, her education, her brief teaching experience in Philadelphia. I never thought I'd find this, she confessed one night as they watched a meteor shower streak across the Wyoming sky. Not just love, but family. Frank's arm tightened around her shoulders. I never thought I'd love again after Catherine. Then you stepped off that stagecoach, or rather, didn't step off it. A most unusual introduction. Everything about us has been unusual, he agreed, but perfect all the same. As autumn approached, bringing with it the start of a new school term, Frank took Harriet on a ride to a secluded meadow high on his property. A small stream cut through it, and wildflowers still bloomed in patches of sunlight. Catherine and I found this place our first year here, he said as they dismounted. She called it Forever Meadow, said it was where the sky touched the earth. It's beautiful, Harriet breathed, turning slowly to take in the panoramic view. Frank took her hands. Harriet, these past months have been the happiest I've known in years. The boys adore you. He faltered, then squared his shoulders. I love you, completely. I know it hasn't been long, but when you know, you know. From his pocket, he produced a small ring, a simple gold band with a modest diamond. "This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it as my wife." Tears sprang to Harriet's eyes. "Oh, Frank, is that a yes?" "Yes," she said through happy tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then lifted her off her feet in a joyous embrace. "The boys already know," he confessed. "I asked for their blessing first. Thomas suggested I give you flowers, but William thought the ring was more practical." Harriet laughed. "They're right on both counts." They were married 2 weeks later in Centralia's small church, with the entire town in attendance. The Xavier boys stood proudly beside their father, and Sheriff Miller gave the bride away. Even Mrs. Peabody made the journey from Cheyenne, her hip mending well enough for her to travel with her sister's help. "Never thought I'd see the day," the old housekeeper sniffed, dabbing at her eyes. "Those boys needed a mother, and heavens no Frank needed a wife." The town council presented them with a quilted wedding blanket made by the women of Centralia. "For the teacher who brought heart back to our school," Mayor Simmons proclaimed. That night, after a celebration at the ranch with friends and neighbors, Harriet became Mrs. Frank Xavier in more than name. Their union was tender and passionate, a beginning woven from two broken paths. "I never believed in fate until I met you," Frank whispered in the darkness. "Now I can't imagine any other way our lives could have unfolded." "Perhaps some things are meant to be," Harriet replied, nestling against his chest. "Though it took outlaws and broken stagecoaches to bring us together. I'd face 100 outlaws to find you. Let's hope that won't be necessary." Life settled into a new rhythm. Harriet continued teaching in town while making the Xavier Ranch a true home. Frank's business prospered under their joint management. Harriet's education complemented his practical knowledge, and together they expanded the ranch's operations. Winter came early that year, bringing heavy snows that often made travel to town impossible. During these stretches, Harriet taught lessons to not only the Xavier boys, but also several neighboring children whose parents were grateful to have education available closer than Centralia. "You've started your own school here," Frank observed one evening as they prepared for bed. "I suppose I have," Harriet agreed. "Though it's hardly official." "It could be," Frank suggested. "We could build a proper schoolroom come spring. There's that old bunkhouse we don't use anymore, it could be converted." The idea took root, and by the time spring thawed the mountain passes, plans were underway for the Xavier Ranch School. With the town council's blessing, Harriet would teach at the ranch 3 days a week and in Centralia for 2, reversing her original arrangement. As the school took shape, so did another development. By early summer, Harriet knew she was expecting their first child. "Are you certain?" Frank asked when she told him, joy and concern mingling in his expression. "Quite certain. The baby should arrive in January." "A winter baby," he mused. "Like William." That evening they gathered the boys to share the news. "Does this mean we'll have a brother or sister?" Thomas asked excitedly. "Yes, it does," Harriet confirmed. William, now 17 and increasingly thoughtful, studied Harriet with concern. "Will you be all right?" Ma wasn't after Thomas. Frank put a hand on his eldest son's shoulder. "Your mother had been ill for some time before Thomas was born. Harriet is healthy and strong, and we'll make sure she has help." "I'll help," James volunteered. "I can take over teaching Thomas his letters. And I can do more chores," Thomas added, not to be outdone. Harriet's heart swelled with love for these boys who had so completely accepted her. "Thank you all. This baby is very lucky to have such wonderful big brothers." The months passed in a blur of activity. The ranch school opened in September with 12 students, the Xavier boys plus 9 children from neighboring ranches. Harriet taught until November, when travel became too difficult with her advancing pregnancy. A young woman from Centralia, Miss Emma Clark, took over Harriet's teaching duties in town and came out to the ranch twice weekly to assist with lessons there. "You've built something remarkable here," Emma told Harriet as Christmas approached. "A school, a family, a community." "It wasn't intentional," Harriet admitted, resting a hand on her rounded belly. "It simply happened, one step at a time. The best things often do." Frank Xavier Jr. was born on a clear, cold January morning in 1878 with Dr. Thompson in attendance and Frank pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when Frank was finally allowed in to see his wife and son, he wept unashamedly. "He's perfect," Frank whispered, cradling the tiny bundle. "Just like his mother." "He has your eyes," Harriet said tiredly, "and I think he'll have your stubborn chin as well." The Xavier boys crept in to meet their new brother, their faces a mixture of awe and pride. "He's so small," Thomas marveled. "You were smaller," James informed him. "I remember. Can I hold him?" William asked. Carefully, Frank transferred the baby to his eldest son's arms, showing him how to support the infant's head. William looked down at his tiny brother with a solemn expression that gradually melted into a smile. "Welcome to the family, Frederick," he said softly. "We've been waiting for you." Spring brought new beginnings. The ranch school flourished, and Harriet gradually resumed teaching as baby Frederick grew. Frank expanded the ranch, purchasing adjoining land when their elderly neighbor decided to retire to California. "It's becoming quite an enterprise," Sheriff Miller commented during a Sunday visit. "Xavier Ranch will be the biggest in the county at this rate." "Not the biggest," Frank corrected, "but the best." As summer approached, Harriet received a letter that shook her composure. It was from her cousin in Philadelphia, the first communication since she had fled Elias Blackwood's unwanted advances. "Margaret writes that Elias died in prison," she told Frank that night. "Apparently he contracted pneumonia and never recovered." Frank took her hand. "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved mainly, and sad for Margaret. Despite everything, she loved him. Now she's alone." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Would you want her to visit, or perhaps come stay for a while? We have the room." Harriet looked at her husband with surprise and gratitude. "You wouldn't mind?" "She's your family, and family is important." "You and the boys and Frederick, you're my family now," Harriet said. "But yes, I'd like to invite Margaret. She was kind to me when my parents died. She just chose the wrong man." "Then write to her. Tell her she's welcome here." Margaret arrived in August, a thin, pale woman whose elegant Philadelphia clothes looked wildly out of place in Wyoming territory. But beneath her refined exterior was a resilient spirit that gradually emerged as she settled into ranch life. "I never imagined you in such a place," Margaret confided as they picked beans in the kitchen garden. "But you seem so content, Harriet, so at peace." "I am, though it wasn't the life I planned." "The best ones rarely are," Margaret said with unexpected wisdom. "Elias and I had such plans, such ambitions. Look where that led us." By the time Margaret returned to Philadelphia in October, she had regained some color in her cheeks and much of her spirit. "I'll be back next summer," she promised, "if I'm still welcome." "Always," Frank assured her. "Your family now." As the years passed, the Xavier Ranch became a center of community life in the region. The ranch school grew, eventually requiring a proper schoolhouse built on the property and a second teacher hired to assist Harriet. The original 3 Xavier boys grew into fine young men, William taking over more ranch responsibilities, James showing a keen mind for business, and Thomas developing a talent for training horses. Frank Jr. was joined by a sister, Catherine Margaret, in 1880, and another brother, Joseph, in 1882. The house expanded along with the family, with new rooms added, and the old ones renovated. In 1885, as Harriet watched her family gathered around the Christmas dinner table, Frank at one end, still handsome despite the silver threading his dark hair, William and his new wife, Sarah, James home from his first year at college in Denver, Thomas teasing Frederick and Catherine while baby Joseph gurgled in Harriet's arms. She was overcome with emotion. "What is it, love?" Frank asked, noticing her tears. "I was just remembering," she said. "That first day when I offered to cook for your boys, and you said, 'Then stay forever if you'd like,'" Frank finished, his blue eyes crinkling with the smile that still made her heart skip. "Best impulsive words I ever spoke. And I did stay. Forever," he agreed, reaching across to take her hand. "And I thank God for it every day." Later that night, after the younger children were tucked in and the older ones had retired to their rooms, Frank and Harriet stood on the porch watching the winter stars, just as they had so many nights before. 10 years ago, I was alone in Philadelphia with nothing but a teaching position in a town I'd never heard of, Harriet mused. Now look at all this. She gestured to the ranch spread out before them, the lights in the bunkhouse where the hands celebrated their own Christmas, the new barn where prize cattle sheltered, the schoolhouse where children from miles around came to learn. "We built it together," Frank said, drawing her close against the cold. "Each piece day by day." "And we'll keep building," Harriet promised, thinking of the plans already taking shape for the coming year: expansions to the cattle operation, improvements to the school, William and Sarah's upcoming baby, the first Xavier grandchild. "Together," Frank agreed. He kissed her then, a kiss that held the warmth of a decade shared and the promise of decades to come. Forever. As they went inside, Harriet paused to look once more at the stars. How strange and wonderful life's journey had been from a frightened woman on a stagecoach to the heart of a thriving family and community. All because she had offered to cook for a cowboy's boys, and he had asked her to stay forever, and she had.